There it was on my screen. My husband Ryan, arms wrapped around a woman I'd never seen before, standing in front of a luxury cabin. Not the remote camping trip he'd told me he desperately needed to clear his head. The timestamp showed just 3 hours after he'd kissed me goodbye with his backpack in tent, promising poor cell service for the next 4 days. My name is Jessica Taylor, and this is the story of how a single Facebook photo led me to uncover a double life, confront, devastating betrayal, and ultimately discover a strength within myself I never knew existed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special. For you! I really need this, Jess, Ryan had said 2 weeks earlier as we prepared dinner in our Seattle home. Work has been suffocating lately. 4 days in the wilderness, no phone, no emails, just me reconnecting with nature. At 42, Ryan had never shown interest in camping before. In our 12 years of marriage, his idea of roughing it was a hotel without room service. But lately, he'd been different, distant, constantly checking his phone with the screen tilted. Away from me? Camping alone? Is that safe? I asked, chopping vegetables for our stir-fry. I won't be alone, he replied quickly. Greg from work is an experienced outdoorsman. He's showing me the ropes. I nodded, pushing down my unease. Ryan had been under pressure since his promotion to partner at his architectural firm 6 months ago. Maybe he did need this break. Besides, he added, wrapping his arms around my waist, you can focus on your children's book illustrations without me interrupting. The morning of his departure, Ryan seemed unusually energetic. He triple-checked his gear, made us breakfast, and kissed me with unexpected passion before loading his backpack into his car. I'll miss you, he said, with an intensity that should have warned me. Remember, I probably won't have cell service. I waved goodbye, feeling a strange heaviness. 12 hours later, that heaviness would transform into numbing shock. I was taking a break from my illustration work, scrolling through Facebook when I saw a post from Melissa, Ryan's coworker, tagged at Cascade Mountain Luxury Retreats. The photos showed a group celebrating someone's birthday at an upscale cabin resort. In the background of the third photo stood Ryan, my supposedly wilderness-bound husband, with his arm wrapped intimately around a striking redhead I'd never seen. Before, my hand shook as I zoomed in. The timestamp showed 3:42 p.m., just hours after he'd left our home with camping gear and promises of disconnecting from technology. I sat frozen as reality shifted beneath me. The way they leaned into each other was intimate, familiar. This was clearly planned. I took screenshots, then checked Melissa's profile for more photos. That's when I saw a comment from the redhead. Thanks for capturing our special weekend, Mel. Love you. Her name was Amber Davis. One click led to another, and soon I was looking at Amber's profile. Photos of her and Ryan together going back nearly a year, weekend trips, intimate dinners, and even one in a jewelry store captioned, "Looking at forever." My 12-year marriage, my partner, my best friend, it had all been a carefully constructed lie. I closed my laptop and ran to the bathroom, barely making it before I vomited. On the cold tile floor, my mind raced through recent memories with new context, the conferences that had grown more frequent, the new password on his phone that he claimed was company policy, the sudden interest in his appearance, new clothes, expensive haircuts, premium cologne, the decreased intimacy between us, always blamed on work stress, the weekend work retreats that left him oddly refreshed rather than exhausted. What had seemed like disconnected occurrences now formed a clear pattern. Ryan wasn't having a brief affair. He was building a parallel life. I returned to my computer with a strange calm that I now recognize as shock. I began methodically documenting everything. Screenshots, dates of his business trips, cross-referenced with Amber's posts, comments revealing their relationship timeline. Then I found something that stopped me cold. Ryan and Amber standing in front of a condo, holding keys with the caption, "Our New Beginning." The location tag read, Lake Washington Waterfront. We didn't own property on Lake Washington. I opened our joint banking app, something I rarely checked since Ryan handled our finances. The password had been changed. Our investment account was also locked. With growing dread, I pulled up our credit card statement. There it was. $50,000 transferred from our joint savings 3 weeks ago. Multiple charges at furniture stores, home improvement retailers, and a recurring payment to Lakeside Properties. My husband hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, he was systematically dismantling our financial future to build one with someone else. That night, I called my sister Claire. Her voice steadied me as I explained what I'd discovered. Don't confront him alone, she warned. You need to understand the full picture first. What if he denies everything? I asked, my voice breaking. He will, she said firmly. Men like that always do. But you have evidence, Jess, and you need to protect yourself, financially and emotionally. After we hung up, I sat in our home office looking at our wedding photo on the wall. The smiling woman in that frame seemed like a stranger now, trusting, naive, unaware that life could change in an instant with a single Facebook photo. Tomorrow, Ryan would return with fabricated stories of wilderness and self-discovery, never knowing his carefully constructed double life had already begun to crumble. And I would be waiting, no longer the woman he thought he could deceive. I barely slept that night. By morning, I had formed a plan. Claire would arrive by noon, and we'd confront Ryan together when he returned. I needed answers before making any decisions, the full extent of his deception, the state of our finances, whether anything of our marriage had been real. Surprisingly, a sense of calm had settled over me. The initial shock had given way to a cold clarity I'd never experienced before. I spent the morning compiling evidence, printing screenshots, organizing bank statements, creating a timeline of Ryan's business trips matched against Amber's, social media posts. I wasn't just gathering ammunition, I was piecing together the true narrative of my marriage. At 10:37 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Heading back now. Amazing trip. Can't wait to see you and sleep in a real bed. Love you. The casual love you made my stomach turn. I didn't respond. Claire arrived at 11:45, wrapping me in a fierce hug before examining the evidence I'd gathered. This is thorough, she said, her attorney's mind already at work. Claire was 5 years older than me, a family law specialist who had always intimidated Ryan. He can't deny any of this. He'll try, I replied, surprising myself with my certainty. Ryan never admits fault. He deflects, minimizes, or turns it back on me. Claire's eyebrows rose slightly. That sounds like a pattern you've noticed before. Her observation hit me like a physical blow. Was she right? Had Ryan always manipulated conversations, subtly shifting blame whenever problems arose? I thought back to countless disagreements over the years, how they often ended with me apologizing even when the issue began with him. I don't think I realized, until now, I admitted. It happened so gradually. It usually does, Claire said gently. Listen, Jess, when he arrives, let me start the conversation. He'll be caught off guard seeing me here, which gives us an advantage. Don't let him isolate you or turn this into a private discussion. That's where his manipulation tactics will work best. I nodded, grateful for her presence. Claire had been through her own divorce 5 years earlier after discovering her husband's gambling addiction had drained their savings. Her experience had transformed her from my somewhat intimidating older sister into my fiercest ally. At 1:23 p.m., I heard Ryan's car in the driveway. Claire and I were seated at the dining room table, evidence arranged neatly before us. My heart hammered in my chest, but my hands were steady. The front door opened and Ryan called out cheerfully, "Honey, I'm home. You wouldn't believe how beautiful it was up in the—" He stopped abruptly in the dining room doorway, backpack still slung over one shoulder, his expression shifting rapidly from surprise to confusion to wariness as he registered Claire's presence and the papers spread across the table. "Claire," he said cautiously, "this is unexpected. Is everything okay?" "Hello, Ryan," Claire replied, her tone professionally neutral. "Jessica asked me to be here for this conversation. Why don't you put your things down and join us?" His eyes darted between us, then to the documents on the table. I could almost see his mind racing, assessing the situation, calculating his response. After a moment, he set down his backpack and took a seat across from us, his expression rearranging into concerned confusion. "What's going on?" he asked, directing the question to me. "You're worrying me, Jess." I met his gaze directly. "How was Cascade Mountain Luxury Retreats?" The flicker in his eyes was momentary but unmistakable. Recognition, then panic. Quickly. "Masked! What are you talking about?" he asked, his brow furrowing in practiced bewilderment. "I was camping in the National Forest. There's no luxury anything where I was." Without breaking eye contact, I turned one of the photographs toward him, Ryan and Amber, arms around each other, the luxury cabin visible in the background. "This was posted on Facebook yesterday," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. 3 hours after you left our house with camping gear." For a moment, he said nothing, staring at the photograph. Then, as if a switch had flipped, his expression changed from confusion to annoyance. "You're spying on me?" he asked, his tone indignant. "Checking up on me, going through my personal business?" "It was posted publicly by your coworker, Melissa," Claire interjected calmly. "That's hardly spying." Ryan turned to her, anger flashing in his eyes. "With all due respect, Claire, this is between me and my wife." "I asked her to be here," I said, "and you haven't answered my question. Who is Amber Davis, and why are you at a luxury retreat with her instead of camping?" His strategy shifted instantly. His shoulders slumped slightly, and he ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times when he was preparing to deliver difficult news to clients. "Look, this isn't how I wanted you to find out," he said, voice softening. "I've been under enormous pressure at work, and things haven't been great between us for a while. Amber she's someone I met through work. It wasn't planned, Jess. It just happened." "Things haven't been great between us?" I repeated, disbelief coloring my voice. "That's your justification?" "I'm not justifying anything," he countered, looking wounded. "I'm trying to be honest. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I interrupted, sliding forward the timeline I'd created. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something hurtful in anger. This," I tapped the paper, "shows a relationship going back at least 10 months. Weekend trips, dinner dates, all while you were supposedly at conferences or working late." His expression hardened slightly. "So you have been spying on me." After finding that photo, I looked at Amber's public social media, I explained, refusing to accept his attempt to make me the wrongdoer. "It wasn't exactly hidden, Ryan." Claire slid forward the bank statements. "Why did you transfer $50,000 from your joint savings account 3 weeks ago?" Ryan's eyes narrowed at my sister. "I don't think our financial matters are any of your business." "Claire, they're my business," I said firmly. "That's our money. Money we saved together for our future. Where did it go, Ryan?" For a moment, he seemed to consider continuing his denials, but something in my expression must have told him it was futile. He sighed heavily, switching tactics again. "I needed to make some investments that I knew you wouldn't understand," he said, his tone reasonable, as if explaining something complex to a child. "The firm has opportunities that require capital up front. I was planning to surprise you when they paid off." "Is that what you call the condo on Lake Washington?" I asked quietly. An investment? His eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected me to know about that. How did you— The photo you and Amber posted holding keys. Our new beginning. That caption wasn't subtle. Ryan fell silent, calculation visible in his eyes. I could almost see him running through potential explanations, excuses, ways to minimize what I'd discovered. Finally, he tried a new approach. I've been unhappy, Jessica, he said, his voice soft with practiced sincerity. You've been so focused on your illustration work, always distracted. We barely connect anymore. Amber understands the pressures I'm under at the firm. She supports my ambitions. The accusation stung despite its absurdity. My freelance work had always taken a back seat to his career. I'd turned down larger projects that would have interfered with his work events or required travel during times. He needed me at home. That's interesting, Claire said before I could respond. Considering Jessica scaled back her career to support yours. Tell me, Ryan, does Amber know you're married? That you own a home with Jessica? Or have you been lying to her too? His expression darkened. You don't know anything about my relationship with Amber. I know you used our joint savings to buy property with her, I said, finding my voice again. I know you've been leading a double life for nearly a year. What I don't know is why you didn't just ask for a divorce if you were so unhappy. Ryan's laugh was cold, unexpected. A divorce? Do you have any idea what that would cost me? Half of everything I've built, half of my future earnings, all because you decided you were done with our marriage? I decided, I began, incredulous, but he cut me off. Yes, you decided. When you stopped trying, when your focus shifted to your little drawing projects instead of supporting my career, when you stopped being the woman I married, His words hit like physical blows, but beneath the pain, something else was crystallizing. Understanding. This wasn't about love or happiness or connection. This was about control and assets and image. So your solution was to secretly start a life with someone else while remaining legally married to me? I asked. To drain our accounts to furnish a home with your girlfriend while keeping me as what? A backup plan? A convenient cover story? Ryan leaned forward, his voice dropping, to a confidential tone that excluded Claire. Jess, we can work through this. I made some mistakes, yes. But our history together counts for something. We can go to counseling, rebuild what we had. The shift was so abrupt it was almost comical. From blaming me for his affair to suggesting reconciliation in the span of seconds. Not because he loved me, but because he'd realized the financial implications of divorce. I don't think that's possible, I said quietly. Don't be hasty, he urged. Think about what divorce would mean. Selling the house, dividing everything, starting over at our age. Is that really what you want? Claire cleared her throat. What? Jessica wants his honesty, Ryan. Complete financial transparency would be a start. Passwords to all accounts, documentation of where marital assets have gone, and a full accounting of the property you've purchased. His expression shifted from conciliatory to cold in an instant. I don't think so. You don't get to dictate terms. Here, Claire. If Jessica wants to throw away 12 years of marriage over one indiscretion, that's her choice. But I won't be bullied into anything. One indiscretion? I repeated. You've been living a double life for almost a year, Ryan. You've diverted our savings, purchased property with another woman, and lied to my face countless times. That's not an indiscretion. That's systematic betrayal. Fine, he snapped, standing abruptly. If that's how you want to play this, we'll do it the hard way. I built this life, Jessica. My firm, my career, my connections. You've been along. For the ride. Contributing what? Part-time doodles while I worked 60-hour weeks? Good luck starting over at 40. As he stormed upstairs, presumably to pack some belongings, Claire reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You okay? I nodded, surprised to find it was true. Despite the cruel words, despite the shattered reality of my marriage, I felt strangely centered. The man who had just revealed his true character was not the Ryan I thought I'd married. Or perhaps he was, and I was finally seeing clearly. "Should we be worried about what he's doing up there?" I whispered. "Let him take clothes and personal items," Claire advised. "We have documentation of everything important. Tomorrow, we file for emergency orders to freeze accounts and prevent disposal of assets." When Ryan returned with a hastily packed suitcase, his composure had returned. Cool, professional, controlled. "I'll be at the Fairmont downtown if you come to your senses," he informed me. "Otherwise, you can have your sister direct any further communication to my attorney." As he walked out the door, I realized this was just the beginning of a battle. I'd never anticipated fighting, but the devastation I'd expected to feel was tempered by something unexpected. The first stirrings of relief, as if I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't recognized until it was gone. The morning after Ryan left, I woke early from a fitful sleep. For a moment, in that hazy space between dreams and consciousness, everything was normal. Then reality crashed back. The Facebook photos, the confrontation, the unraveling of my life as I knew it. I reached for my phone and found 3 missed calls and a text from Ryan. "You're overreacting. We need to talk privately, without your sister interfering. I can explain everything. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just another attempt to get me alone where his manipulation tactics worked best." Claire was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, laptop open and coffee brewing. She'd stayed the night in our guest room, concerned about leaving me alone after the confrontation. "I've made an appointment with Elaine Hodges," she announced as she handed me a mug of coffee. 9:30 this morning. "Who's Elaine Hodges?" "The best divorce attorney in Seattle. Also a forensic accounting specialist. She used to work for the IRS tracking financial fraud before she went into family law." I winced at the word divorce. Despite everything, hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way the evidence hadn't. 12 years of marriage, a shared home, holiday traditions and inside jokes and the comfortable rhythms of a life built together, all ending, not with mutual agreement and respect, but with betrayal and deception. "Is that premature?" I asked, more to myself than to Claire. "Should I at least hear his explanation?" Claire's expression softened. "Jess, what explanation could possibly justify what he's done? This isn't a one-time mistake. This is sustained, calculated deception, emotionally and financially." She was right, but a lifetime of being a peacemaker, of giving people the benefit of the doubt, was hard to overcome in a single day. "Meeting with an attorney doesn't commit you to anything," Claire continued, "but it will help you understand your options and protect yourself while you decide what you want." By 9:15, we were seated in Elaine Hodges' sleek downtown office. The attorney was nothing like I'd expected, not the stern, intimidating figure I'd imagined, but a warm woman in her 50s with a direct gaze and a reassuring manner. "Claire has filled me in on the basics," she said after introductions. "But I'd like to hear everything from you, Jessica." For the next 30 minutes, I recounted the story: the fake camping trip, the Facebook discovery, the financial revelations, yesterday's confrontation. Elaine listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, her expression revealing nothing. "Before we discuss strategy," she said when I'd finished, "I need to ask you something important. Looking back honestly, were there warning signs you might have missed?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the shock of discovery, I hadn't really examined the months and years leading up to it. "I suppose there were changes," I admitted. "Ryan became more secretive about his phone. He started upgrading his wardrobe, paying more attention to his appearance. There were more late nights at work, more weekend commitments, but they happened so gradually." "That's typically how it goes," Elaine nodded. "Now, what about finances? Were there changes in how money was handled or discussed?" I thought about it. "About a year ago, Ryan suggested consolidating our investment accounts. He said it would be more efficient if everything was managed together, with him as the primary account holder since he understood the market better. I didn't question it because finance is his profession. And your career? Elaine prompted. Has that been affected by the marriage? I was building a promising career in commercial illustration when we married, I explained. When Ryan's firm offered him advancement opportunities that required more networking and travel, we decided I'd scale back to freelance work I could do from home. It made sense at the time. His earning potential was higher, and one of us needed flexibility. Claire, who had been quiet until now, interjected. What Jessica isn't saying is that she's incredibly talented. She was offered a position as lead illustrator for a major children's publishing house 3 years ago. A dream job, but turned it down because Ryan was in the middle of his push for partnership. Elaine made another note. So you've made significant career sacrifices to support his advancement. Put that way, it sounded so obvious. Yes, I suppose I have. That's relevant to our approach, Elaine explained. Now, let's talk about immediate priorities. Based on what you've shared, I'm concerned about the financial situation. Ryan has already moved substantial assets without your knowledge or consent. We need to act quickly to prevent further dissipation. What followed was a crash course in divorce procedures, financial discovery, and protective orders. My head spun with terms like temporary restraining orders, financial injunctions, and asset freezes. By the time Elaine outlined a proposed strategy, I felt both overwhelmed and oddly empowered by the concrete steps ahead. One last thing, Elaine said as our meeting concluded. I'm going to give you homework. I need you to become a financial detective in your own marriage. She provided a detailed checklist, gathering tax returns for the past 5 years, obtaining credit reports, documenting all bank accounts and investments, creating an inventory of valuable personal property, and collecting any evidence related to the condo purchase. The more information you can gather now, before Ryan has a chance to hide or manipulate records, the stronger position we'll be in, she explained. And Jessica, change your passwords on everything. Email, social media, any personal accounts. Create new ones that Ryan couldn't possibly guess. As Claire drove us home, my mind raced with the tasks ahead. The passivity that had characterized much of my marriage was giving way to something else, an urgent need to understand exactly what I was facing. Are you okay? Claire asked, glancing at me as we stopped at a traffic light. Strangely, yes, I replied. I feel focused. And it was true. Beneath the hurt and betrayal, a newfound clarity was emerging. Yesterday, I had been a victim of Ryan's deception. Today, I was becoming an active investigator of my own life. Back home, I transformed our rarely used dining room into an impromptu command center. I created labeled folders, started spreadsheets, and methodically worked through Elaine's checklist. Claire stayed for a few hours, helping me organize and offering suggestions, before reluctantly leaving for an afternoon court appearance. Lock the doors, she instructed. If Ryan shows up, don't let him in. Call me immediately. Alone in the house, I felt a momentary wave of panic. What if Ryan did return? What if he became angry when he discovered I'd met with an attorney? But the feeling passed quickly, replaced by determination. This was my home too. I wouldn't be intimidated in my own space. I started with the file cabinet in our home office, systematically reviewing and photographing every financial document I could find. Most were at least 2 years old. Recent records had apparently migrated to digital formats I couldn't access due to changed passwords. In the back of Ryan's desk drawer, I found a small lockbox I'd never seen before. It was secured with a combination lock, but after trying several possibilities, I discovered it opened with our wedding date, a detail so ironic it would have been funny under different circumstances. Inside was a USB drive and several documents. The drive contained photos of Ryan and Amber that hadn't appeared on social media, vacations, dinner dates, intimate moments. The timestamps confirmed what I already knew about the timeline of their relationship, but seeing them still felt like a physical blow. The documents proved more immediately valuable. Preliminary paperwork for the Lake Washington condo, showing a purchase price of $850,000 with a down payment of $170,000. The financing application listed only Ryan as the purchaser, with no mention of Amber, though her name appeared on other documents as a resident. Where had the $170,000 down payment come from? The $50,000 transfer I'd discovered couldn't account for all of it. What other accounts had Ryan accessed without my knowledge? I remembered an investment portfolio Ryan had established early in our marriage. We'd contributed to it monthly for years, but discussions about it had tapered off around the time Ryan suggested consolidating our accounts. Could that be the source? My search for answers led me to our tax returns. As I reviewed them year by year, a pattern emerged. Income was clearly reported, but investment accounts had shifted over time. Accounts that appeared on earlier returns were absent from recent ones, replaced by new entities with unfamiliar names. By late afternoon, I'd created a financial timeline that showed a disturbing pattern. For approximately 18 months, Ryan had been systematically restructuring our finances, consolidating accounts under his sole control, establishing new investment vehicles with ambiguous ownership structures, and gradually moving assets away from joint accessibility. The condo. Purchase wasn't a sudden decision. It was the culmination of a carefully executed plan. As I stared at the evidence spread across the dining table, a peculiar calm settled over me. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was premeditated financial deception. Ryan hadn't simply fallen for another woman. He had calculated and executed an exit strategy designed to leave me with as little as possible. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Jessica, this is Amber Davis. We need to talk. Please call me." Attached was a photo of Amber sitting in what appeared to be a coffee shop, her expression serious. I stared at the message, 1,000 questions racing through my mind. How had she obtained my number? What could she possibly want to discuss? Was this genuine or a strategy Ryan had orchestrated? Before I could decide how to respond, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw not Ryan, but a woman with familiar red hair. Amber Davis was standing on my porch. My heart raced as I considered my options. Should I ignore her? Call Claire? Confront her directly? Curiosity and a strange need for answers won out. I opened the door but remained firmly in the threshold, blocking entry. "Jessica," she said, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm Amber. I think we need to talk." "About what?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "About how you've been having a relationship with my husband for the past year? Or about the condo you're sharing, paid for with money from our joint accounts?" She flinched, genuine surprise crossing her features. "He told me you knew. That you had an arrangement, an open marriage. That you were focusing on your career and weren't interested in physical intimacy anymore." The audacity of Ryan's lies momentarily robbed me of speech. An open marriage? Career focus? I had systematically sacrificed my career to support his. "Please," Amber continued, misinterpreting my silence. "I just need to understand what's happening. Ryan's been acting strange since yesterday, moving his things out of the condo, saying there's been a misunderstanding. I thought we were building a life together." Something in her voice, vulnerability, confusion, perhaps even genuine distress, made me reassess the woman before me. Was she another victim of Ryan's manipulation rather than a knowing accomplice? "You should come in," I said finally. "I think we both need some answers." As Amber stepped into my home, the home I'd shared with Ryan for 12 years, I realized the investigation had entered a new phase. The truth was more complex than I had imagined, and uncovering it would require facing not just financial documents but the human cost of Ryan's deception. He told you we had an open marriage? I asked, setting a cup of tea in front of Amber at my dining room table, the same table now covered with evidence of her relationship with my husband. She nodded, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her cup. He said you two had grown apart, physically, but stayed together for practical reasons, that you were pursuing your art career and had given him freedom. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. My art career? I turned down my dream job 3 years ago because Ryan said it would interfere with his partnership track. I've been working part-time from home to accommodate his schedule. Amber's face paled. That's not what he told me. I'm learning that what Ryan tells people has little relationship to reality, I said, surprised by my own composure. Sitting across from my husband's mistress should have been unbearable. Yet here I was, almost clinical in my approach. For the next hour, Amber and I compared notes, filling in gaps in each other's understanding of Ryan's double life. A picture emerged of a man far more calculating than either of us had realized. He told me you two were essentially separated, living together as roommates, Amber explained. That divorce was inevitable, but complicated by financial entanglements he was working to resolve. While telling me nothing was wrong, I added, that his late nights were work commitments and his weekend trips were conferences or client meetings. Amber pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. He's been talking about our future together for months. Look. She showed me texts where Ryan discussed their 5-year plan. Moving to Los Angeles, starting fresh, building a life together. Los Angeles? I repeated, confused. His firm is here in Seattle. He said he was negotiating a position at Kingston Partners' LA office, a significant promotion with nearly double his current salary. I shook my head. Ryan doesn't work for Kingston Partners. He's at Westridge Financial and has been for 9 years. Amber stared at me, disbelief evident on her face. That's impossible. He takes calls from Kingston colleagues all the time. I've met his boss, Marcus Kingston, at a firm event. Something clicked in my memory. Tall man, silver hair, British. Accent? Yes, Amber confirmed, hope flaring briefly in her eyes that something in our conflicting narratives might align. That's not Marcus Kingston. That's Julian Wells, Ryan's college roommate who moved to London after graduation and recently returned. They've been friends for 20 years. Amber set down her phone, her hand visibly shaking. So he's been lying. About his job? About everything? It appears so, I said quietly. The question is why? What's the end game here? Amber took a deep breath. There's something else you should know. We're supposed to close on the condo next week. Ryan said it was an investment property with excellent potential, but he needed to keep it quiet because of some complications with his current firm. How much is the down payment? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. 200,000, she replied. I contributed 30,000 from my savings. Ryan is handling the rest. The pieces suddenly aligned with terrible clarity. The $50,000 transfer I'd discovered, the missing investment portfolio, Ryan's increasingly lavish spending, it was all building toward this purchase, a property legally structured to shield assets while he planned his exit. Have you signed the final paperwork yet? I asked urgently. No, that's scheduled for Monday. Why? I stood and retrieved the documents I'd found in Ryan's lockbox, spreading them on the table. Because these show the property being purchased for $850,000 with a $170,000 down payment. No mention of your $30,000 contribution. Amber took the papers with trembling hands, reviewing them slowly. This lists me as a resident, not an owner. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I would have no equity. And it appears the remainder of the down payment is coming from our joint assets, I added, transferred without my knowledge or consent. We sat in silence for a moment, two women processing the magnitude of one man's deception. I felt a sudden, unexpected surge of compassion for Amber. Whatever her role in this situation, she too had been manipulated by someone expert at exploiting trust. "How long have you known Ryan?" I asked finally. 14 months. We met at a charity auction. He bid on an art piece I was interested in, then offered to let me visit it anytime in his office. He was charming, attentive. Her voice trailed off. "I feel so stupid." "Don't," I said firmly. "Ryan is exceptionally good at presenting the version of himself people want to see. I lived with him for 12 years and missed the signs." Amber's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Ryan's name flashed on the screen. Our eyes met, a moment of silent communication passing between us. I nodded slightly. "Put it on speaker," I suggested. "But don't mention where you are." She answered, her voice remarkably steady. "Hi, Ryan." "Amber, where are you?" His voice came through clearly, concern edged with something harder. "I've been trying to reach you all afternoon." "I needed some time to think," she replied carefully. "After yesterday, I'm confused about what's happening with us, with the condo." "That's why I've been calling," he said, his tone shifting to the persuasive business voice I knew so well. "There's been a misunderstanding with Jessica. She found some photos and jumped to conclusions. I'm handling it, but we need to lay low for a few days." "What kind of misunderstanding?" Amber pressed. "She seemed pretty clear about things when she confronted you." A pause. "How do you know what happened with Jessica?" Amber glanced at me, panic flashing briefly in her eyes. "You told me you had a fight when you got home, that she was upset about the camping trip." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear Ryan recalibrating his approach. "Right," he said finally. "Look, Jessica and I have had problems for years. This reaction is just her trying to control the narrative as we move toward separation. But we need to be strategic about timing. The condo closing is critical. Once that's finalized, we'll have our foundation for moving forward." "Moving forward with what exactly?" Amber asked, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. "With us, of course," Ryan replied smoothly. "Our plans haven't changed. Jessica is just making things complicated temporarily. That's why we need to proceed carefully with the property purchase." "And what about your job at Kingston Partners?" she asked. "Is that still happening?" The briefest hesitation. "Absolutely. Everything is on track for the LA position. In fact, that's partly why I called. Marcus wants to meet with both of us next week to discuss relocation packages." I watched Amber's face harden as Ryan piled lie upon lie, seemingly unaware he was digging himself deeper with every word. "One more thing," she said, her voice now controlled and deliberate. "The down payment for the condo. You said my $30,000 would be specifically allocated toward the master suite renovations, but the paperwork doesn't mention my contribution at all." "That's just preliminary documentation," Ryan explained, without missing a beat. "The final papers will reflect your investment. Trust me, I've structured this to benefit both of us." I couldn't help but marvel at his ability to sound completely sincere while fabricating reality in real time. "I see," Amber said simply. "I should go. I need more time to process everything." "Where are you?" Ryan asked again, an edge entering his voice. "We should talk in person. Clear the air." "I'll call you later," she replied, ending the call before he could press further. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of revelation. Amber looked up at me, her expression a complex mix of anger, embarrassment, and something that might have been resolve. "He's never worked at Kingston Partners, has he?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "Not to my knowledge. And I've attended his firm's holiday parties at Westridge for nearly a decade. And there's no job in Los Angeles? I very much doubt it." Amber closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the vulnerability had been replaced by determination. "I need to know everything, Jessica. Not just about the relationship lies. Those are painful but obvious now. I need to understand the financial deception. My savings may not be much compared to what you've lost, but it's everything I have." I nodded, feeling an unexpected kinship with this woman who, hours earlier, I had viewed as an adversary. "What do you do for a living, Amber?" "I'm a physical therapist. I work with trauma recovery patients." A small, sad smile touched her lips. Ironic, considering I completely missed the trauma being inflicted in my own life. That explained something else. Ryan had always been attracted to caregiving personalities, people whose natural instinct was to support, to nurture, to give others the benefit of the doubt. It made us perfect targets for his particular brand of manipulation. I gestured to my impromptu investigation center. "I've been piecing together Ryan's financial activities for the past 18 months. From what I can tell, he's been systematically moving assets, establishing new accounts, and creating a financial infrastructure completely under his control." "For what purpose?" Amber asked, moving to examine the timeline I'd created. "I think he was planning an exit strategy that would allow him to leave the marriage with majority assets intact," I explained. "The condo purchase appears to be part of that, a significant investment in his sole name, funded primarily with marital assets." "But where do I fit in?" she asked, confusion evident. "If his plan was to leave you with minimal assets, why involve me at all? Why the elaborate relationship?" It was a good question, one I'd been pondering myself. Why not simply hide assets and then file for divorce? Why construct an entire parallel life? The answer came to me with sudden clarity. "Image," I said. "Ryan has always been obsessed with how others perceive him. A middle-aged man abruptly leaving his wife of 12 years for no apparent reason would damage his professional reputation, raise questions. But leaving for a genuine love connection, a relationship that just happened despite his best efforts to resist? That's a narrative people accept, even sympathize with." Amber absorbed this, nodding slowly. "And my contribution to the condo? Additional? Funding he doesn't have to account for in divorce proceedings," I suggested. "Money that isn't traced to marital assets but still benefits him." A knock at the door interrupted our analysis. Through the peephole I saw Claire, returned from her court appearance. When I let her in, she stopped short at the sight of Amber sitting at our dining table. "Claire," I said calmly, "this is Amber Davis. She's been helping me understand the full scope of Ryan's deception. I think she's been as misled as I have." My sister's protective instincts warred visibly with her attorney's analytical mind. After a moment, the latter won out. "Ms. Davis," she said with professional courtesy, "your presence here could have significant implications for the legal proceedings ahead." "Are you aware of that?" Amber straightened her shoulders. "I'm beginning to understand exactly how significant," she replied. "And I'm prepared to share everything I know about Ryan's financial representations to me, including evidence that he's attempting to funnel jointly owned marital assets into property under his sole control." Claire raised an eyebrow, impressed despite herself. She turned to me. "Elaine is going to find this development very interesting." As Claire joined our impromptu investigation team, the full picture of Ryan's duplicity emerged with disturbing clarity. Multiple lives, elaborate lies, and a financial shell game designed to leave both women compromised while he walked away with the majority of assets. The revelation wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about a calculated scheme of financial and emotional fraud that had nearly succeeded. But he hadn't counted on one thing: the two women he'd tried to play against each other, finding common cause in exposing the truth. That night, after Amber left with copies of relevant documents and a promise to meet with Elaine Hodges the next day, I found myself alone in the master bathroom, staring at my reflection. The woman looking back at me seemed simultaneously familiar and foreign. Same brown eyes, same wavy hair now streaked with early gray I'd been too busy to color, same laugh lines at the corners of my mouth. But something fundamental had shifted behind those eyes. 12 hours ago, I had been devastated by the discovery of Ryan's affair, heartbroken by the betrayal of our marriage vows. Now, having uncovered the true extent of his deception, I felt something entirely different. A cold, clarifying anger that burned away confusion and self-doubt. This wasn't a story about a husband who had fallen in love with another woman. This was about a calculated predator who had strategically targeted and manipulated two women, constructing elaborate fictions to extract financial and emotional resources from both. As I mechanically performed my nightly routine, washing my face, brushing my teeth, activities that felt bizarrely normal amid the collapse of my reality, a memory surfaced from early in our relationship. Ryan and I had been dating for 6 months when I received an opportunity to illustrate a children's book series. I'd been ecstatic, bouncing with excitement as I told him over dinner. His response had been supportive, but tinged with something I couldn't quite identify at the time. "That's wonderful, Jess," he'd said, squeezing my hand. "Though I hope it won't take too much time away from us. These new relationships are fragile things." I had been touched by his desire to protect our connection. Now, with 12 years of hindsight and the veil of trust ripped away, I recognized his response for what it was. The first subtle move to isolate my success, to position his needs as the priority, to establish the pattern that would define our marriage. How many other red flags had I missed or excused? How many times had I diminished my own needs or ambitions to accommodate his? The questions tumbled through my mind as I climbed into bed, our bed, that now felt tainted by deception. Sleep evaded me. Around 2 a.m., I gave up trying and went downstairs to the dining room where evidence of Ryan's double life remained spread across the table. In the quiet darkness, illuminated only by a small desk lamp, I began to organize everything chronologically, creating a timeline of manipulation that spanned our entire relationship. Early dating, Ryan's subtle discouragement of career opportunities that didn't center him. First year of marriage, his insistence on joint accounts that he primarily managed. Year 3, the suggestion that I scale back to freelance work when his career temporarily needed more support. Year 5, the consolidation of our investment accounts under his sole management. Years 7 through 10, the gradual expansion of his work, commitments, creating space for his double life to develop, and most recently, the elaborate financial shell game designed to extract maximum assets while leaving me financially vulnerable in divorce. As I documented this pattern, something crystallized within me. A fundamental shift in perspective that felt almost physical in its intensity. I had been viewing myself as a victim of Ryan's betrayal. But what if the betrayal was actually my liberation? What if discovering his deception now, before he had completed his exit strategy, was the most fortunate thing that could have happened to me? For the first time since seeing that Facebook photo, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude that I had discovered the truth before Ryan had finished executing his plan. Gratitude that his carelessness, allowing himself to be photographed at the luxury retreat, had provided the opening I needed to uncover the full scope of his deception. Most surprisingly, I felt gratitude toward Amber, whose willingness to compare notes had accelerated my understanding of what we were dealing with. Her perspective had transformed this from a marital betrayal to a criminal conspiracy, shifting my emotional response from heartbreak to righteous indignation. With this new clarity came purpose. I would not be the passive victim in Ryan's carefully constructed narrative. I would not be the discarded wife, pathetically clinging to a marriage while he moved on with his glamorous new partner. I would certainly not be the financial casualty of his midlife reinvention. I pulled out a fresh notebook and began writing, not a documentation of the past this time, but a strategic plan for the future. By dawn, I had filled several pages with action items. 1. Secure all evidence and create backups stored in multiple locations. Open individual bank accounts and credit cards in my name only. Document the full inventory of our home, including art, jewelry, and collectibles Ryan might try to remove. Contact my former clients and colleagues to explore returning to full-time illustration work. Begin researching apartments or condos I could afford on my own. Meet with financial advisor, independent, of Ryan's firm, to understand options for rebuilding retirement savings. As I reviewed the list, I realized something profound had changed overnight. Instead of asking, "How could this happen to me?" I was now asking, "What do I want my life to look like after this?" The shift from backward-looking victim to forward-looking agent of my own destiny felt like emerging from a dark tunnel into unexpected light. Claire arrived early, carrying breakfast and coffee. She found me still at the dining table, surrounded by organized files and my action plan. "You look different," she observed, studying my face. "More focused." "I am," I confirmed, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I spent the night thinking about everything, and I've decided something important." "What's that?" "I'm done being reactive. From this moment forward, every decision I make will be strategic and purposeful. Ryan has been planning his exit for at least 18 months. Now I'm planning my future." Claire's expression shifted from concern to approval. "That's the sister I know," she said, squeezing my shoulder. "What's first on the agenda?" "Financial triage," I replied, pointing to my list. "I need to establish my own accounts immediately, before Ryan realizes how much we've discovered." By 9 a.m., we were at a credit union across town, one where Ryan had no existing relationships. With Claire's guidance, I opened checking and savings accounts, applied for a credit card in my name only, and arranged for direct deposit of my freelance illustration income that had previously gone into our joint account. "It's not much," I acknowledged as we left the bank, the new debit card feeling strange but empowering in my wallet. "My income has been supplemental for years." "It's a start," Claire replied pragmatically. "And it establishes your financial independence going forward." Our next stop was a meeting with Elaine Hodges, who had rearranged her Saturday schedule after Claire called with news of Amber's revelations. To my surprise, Amber was already waiting in the attorney's conference room when we arrived, a folder of documents on the table before her. "I brought everything I could find related to the condo purchase," she explained, her eyes revealing a sleepless night similar to my own. "And all the communications from Ryan about his supposed job at Kingston Partners." Elaine listened intently as we pieced together the dual deception Ryan had perpetrated. Her expression remained professional, but I detected growing outrage beneath her composed exterior. "This changes our approach significantly," she said when we finished. "What we're dealing with now goes beyond divorce proceedings. There are potential criminal implications for wire fraud, identity theft if he forged your signature on any documents, and possibly tax fraud depending on how he's reported these financial maneuvers." "Criminal charges?" I asked, the concept simultaneously shocking and satisfying. "Is that the direction we want to go?" "It gives us considerable leverage," Elaine explained. "Many people in Ryan's position, especially those with professional careers dependent on reputation, will agree to extremely favorable divorce terms to avoid criminal prosecution." "And my savings?" Amber asked quietly. "The $30,000 I contributed to a property where I apparently have no ownership stake?" "That's a separate civil matter," Elaine replied, "but one with excellent prospects given the evidence of misrepresentation. I have a colleague who specializes in such cases who could assist you." As the meeting continued, we outlined an aggressive strategy that took full advantage of the unexpected alliance between Amber and me. Rather than the adversarial position Ryan had undoubtedly anticipated, two women fighting over him and his assets, we presented a united front that significantly strengthened both our cases. By the time we left Elaine's office 3 hours later, I felt something I hadn't experienced since discovering Ryan's betrayal: hope. Not hope for reconciliation or for restoration of what was lost, but hope for a future defined by my choices rather than by Ryan's deception. "What now?" Claire asked as we walked to her car. I checked my watch. Ryan texted earlier that he's coming by the house at 3 to talk sensibly. That gives us 2 hours to prepare. "Are you sure you want to see him?" Elaine advised against any unmonitored conversations. "I'm not having a private conversation with him," I assured her. "I want you there, along with the documentation we've gathered. This isn't an emotional confrontation. It's a strategic showing of cards." Claire studied me for a moment before nodding. "You really have turned a corner, haven't you?" "I had to," I replied simply. The alternative was to remain in the story Ryan created, playing the role he assigned me. I'm writing my own story now. Back at the house, we prepared for Ryan's arrival. I changed from my casual weekend clothes into a professional outfit I usually reserved for client meetings. Subtle armor for the confrontation ahead. Claire helped me arrange key documents on the dining table, organized for maximum impact, but revealing only what we wanted Ryan to know at this stage. At precisely 3 p.m., the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Ryan standing on our porch, his expression set in what I now recognized as his reasonable problem-solver face, a look he had perfected for difficult client meetings, and, apparently, manipulating the women in his life. As I reached for the door handle, I felt a momentary tremor in my fingers, a physical reminder of how much this man had once meant to me, how thoroughly he had been integrated into my sense of self and security. But the tremor passed quickly, replaced by the calm certainty that had been building since my middle-of-the-night epiphany. Ryan Chen was no longer the center of my universe. He was simply a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be navigated on my path forward. I opened the door, meeting his practiced smile with a level gaze that clearly caught him off guard. In that moment of surprise, I glimpsed something revealing beneath his composed exterior, not remorse or shame, but calculation. He was already reassessing, adjusting his approach based on my unexpected composure. "Jessica," he said, his voice gentle with manufactured concern. "I think it's time we talked like adults about this situation." "I couldn't agree more," I replied, stepping aside to let him enter. "In fact, I've prepared quite a comprehensive overview of our situation. I think you'll find it illuminating." The slight falter in his step as he moved past me confirmed what I already knew. This was not the broken, emotional wife he had expected to find. This was someone new, someone he had never fully seen because she had been hidden beneath years of compromise and accommodation. As I closed the door behind him, I felt the symbolic weight of the gesture. I was closing the door on the marriage, on the fiction we had lived, on the woman I had been, and I was opening the door to whatever came next, on my own terms. Ryan stepped into the dining room and froze, his confident stride faltering as he took in the scene before him. The table was covered with neatly organized documents, bank statements, property records, screenshots, and timeline charts. Claire sat calmly at one end, legal pad before her, pen poised. And at the head of the table was me, in the chair Ryan had always claimed as his own. "What is this?" he asked, his tone sliding from the practiced concern he'd shown at the door to something harder. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "As you said, it's time we talked like adults." He remained standing, eyes darting over the assembled evidence. "I thought we agreed to speak privately, Jessica. Claire's presence isn't necessary." "Actually, we didn't agree to anything," I corrected him. "You suggested coming over to talk. I made no promises about the conditions of that conversation." Claire spoke up, her tone professionally neutral. "Ryan, my sister has retained legal counsel for divorce proceedings. As her family representative, I'm here to ensure any discussions remain constructive and documented." The slight narrowing of his eyes told me he understood the implication. Everything he said would be recorded or witnessed. The rules of engagement had changed, and he hadn't been consulted. Reluctantly, he sat, adjusting his posture to project relaxed confidence despite the tension evident in his shoulders. "This feels unnecessarily adversarial, Jess. We've been married for 12 years. Surely we can work through this without immediately involving lawyers and accusations." "That's exactly what I hoped," I agreed, surprising him with my calm tone. Unfortunately, some recent discoveries have made that approach impossible. I slid a folder toward him. Inside were printouts of his text exchanges with Amber, photos of the Lake Washington condo, and the purchase agreement bearing his signature. "You've been speaking with Amber," he said flatly, his expression shuddering as he quickly assessed this new complication. "Yes, it was quite illuminating to compare notes on your various representations to each of us." Ryan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he attempted a rueful smile. "I can see how this looks bad, Jess. I should have been honest about the relationship developing with Amber. That's on me, and I'm sorry for the pain it's caused. But jumping straight to divorce and legal proceedings seems extreme. We have history, a foundation we can build on if you're willing to work through this." I marveled at his performance, the perfect blend of admission and minimization, the strategic apology that acknowledged only what he knew I could prove while positioning himself as reasonable and conciliatory. "The issue isn't just your relationship with Amber," I explained, keeping my tone even. "It's the systematic financial deception that accompanied it." I presented the second folder, this one containing records of the transferred funds, the investment, accounts he'd emptied, and the forged documents bearing approximations of my signature. "This is about much more than infidelity, Ryan. This is about fraud, forgery, and theft of marital assets. That's why we're here with documentation rather than tears and recriminations." For the first time, I saw genuine alarm break through his composed facade. He hadn't expected this level of investigation, hadn't anticipated that Amber and I would compare narratives and discover the extent of his deception so quickly. "These are serious accusations," he said, voice hardening, "and completely distorted. Any financial adjustments I've made have been for our benefit. If you'd bothered to ask about the investments rather than immediately assuming the worst, please explain how purchasing a condo in your name alone, using our joint savings and Amber's contribution, benefits our marriage," I interrupted. "I'm genuinely curious about the reasoning." The direct challenge caught him off guard. Ryan had always controlled our conversations, setting the pace and direction. My interruption disrupted his practice script. "The property market in that area is showing exceptional growth potential," he began, falling back on business jargon. "I structured the purchase to maximize tax advantages that wouldn't be available with joint ownership. And you forged my signature on the HELOC against our home because of tax advantages?" I pressed. His expression darkened. "I did not forge anything. If you're referring to the home equity line, you signed those papers yourself last fall. It was part of the refinancing package for lower interest rates." I shook my head. "No, Ryan, I signed refinancing documents, yes, but not a $200,000 home equity line that you've since drawn against to fund your separate life with Amber." For nearly 40 minutes, the confrontation continued in this vein, Ryan alternating between denial, minimization, and attempts to reframe his actions as misunderstood financial strategy. With each piece of evidence I presented, his responses became increasingly defensive and his justifications more convoluted. Finally, seeing his usual tactics failing, Ryan shifted to his final strategy, intimidation. "You know," he said, leaning forward with cold intensity, "pursuing this path will destroy both of us financially. Legal battles drain resources that could be preserved through reasonable settlement, and the professional embarrassment will impact my earnings potential, which ultimately hurts you too." I met his gaze steadily. "That's a risk I'm willing to take. Principle matters more to me than convenience." "Principle?" He laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Since when have you been willing to fight for anything, Jessica? You've spent the last decade compromising your career, your ambitions, your identity, all to maintain the comfortable life I've provided. Now suddenly you're Joan of Arc, willing to burn everything down on principle?" His words were calculated to wound, to remind me of my dependence and adaptability, traits he had always leveraged to maintain control. But instead of pain, I felt a surge of clarity and resolve. "You're right about one thing," I acknowledged. "I did compromise, repeatedly and extensively. I believed that's what partnership required. But I've learned something important, Ryan. Compromise only works when both people are sacrificing for mutual benefit. What you've been doing isn't compromise, it's exploitation." Something shifted in his expression then, a flicker of uncertainty as he realized his usual tools of manipulation weren't working. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, he was seeing me clearly rather than the compliant projection he had crafted. "This conversation is pointless," he said abruptly, standing. "I'll have my attorney contact yours. Since you've chosen the adversarial route, we'll proceed accordingly." As he reached the door, I called after him, "Ryan, one more thing you should know." He paused without turning. "The Seattle District Attorney has taken a particular interest in financial fraud cases recently. Elaine Hodges has an excellent working relationship with their office." His shoulders stiffened before he walked out without responding, the door closing with careful control rather than an emotional slam. Even in retreat, Ryan maintained his facade of reasoned composure. Claire let out a breath as his car pulled away. "That was impressive, Jess. You didn't let him derail you once." "It helps to recognize the tactics when you see them," I replied, gathering the documents into their folders. "After 12 years, I've seen every manipulation in Ryan's playbook. I just never identified them as manipulation until now." "What's next?" Claire asked. "Next, we build our case and our support network. This was just the opening salvo. Over the next week, I systematically mobilized every resource available to strengthen my position, legally, financially, emotionally, and professionally. My first priority was securing full documentation of our marital assets before Ryan could conceal or transfer anything further. With Elaine's guidance, I filed emergency motions to freeze joint accounts and prevent disposition of property. The FAO judge, presented with evidence of Ryan's previous transfers and the forged HELOC, granted the orders within 48 hours. Ryan's reaction was predictable. A furious phone call demanding to know what game I was playing by unnecessarily involving the courts. I referred him to Elaine and ended the call, another small victory in reclaiming my autonomy. My next focus was rebuilding professional connections that had languished during my years of prioritizing Ryan's career. I started with Marcus Brennan, the art director who had offered me the children's book series position 3 years earlier. "Jessica Taylor," he greeted warmly when I called. "Please tell me you're finally ready to illustrate the Moonlight Meadow series. The placeholder art is adequate, but it lacks your distinctive style." "The series is still ongoing?" I asked, surprised, and touched that he remembered my work so specifically. 8 books in and contracted for 4 more, he confirmed. "The response has been tremendous. I've kept your contact information all this time, hoping you might reconsider." The conversation that followed was both validating and practical. Marcus not only offered me contract work on the newest books in the series, but suggested several other projects that might suit my style. By the end of the call, I had potential income streams that could sustain me independently while I rebuilt my client base. "Your timing is perfect," Marcus mentioned before we concluded. "We're hosting a children's book illustration showcase next month. Having new work from you would be a highlight. The showcase would be the perfect opportunity to reestablish myself professionally." I committed immediately, the deadline creating both pressure and purpose that helped focus my energy away from the divorce proceedings. With financial freeze orders in place and professional opportunities secured, I turned to the emotional infrastructure necessary for the challenging months ahead. My first call was to my mother, a retired psychologist who had always respected the boundaries of my marriage, despite occasional concerns about Ryan's controlling tendencies. "I knew something was wrong," she said after I explained the situation. "At Christmas, when he kept answering questions directed to you about your illustration work. The dynamic felt off, but you seemed to accept it as normal." "It had become normal?" I admitted. "That's what scares me most looking back. How gradually the control established itself until I couldn't recognize it anymore." "That's how emotional manipulation works, sweetie," she explained gently. "Small increments that wouldn't justify objection in isolation, accumulating over time into complete constraint. The good news is you've recognized it now, and awareness is the first step toward change." My mother offered not just emotional support, but practical assistance, volunteering to help sort through household items I might need for an eventual move, suggesting resources for emotional recovery from betrayal, and offering her guest room as a sanctuary if I needed space from the memories saturating my home. With professional potential reactivated and family support secured, I reached out to friends I had neglected during my marriage, relationships that had gradually faded as Ryan subtly discouraged distractions from our home life and his career needs. Diane Matthews, my college roommate and once closest confidant, responded to my cautious reconnection attempt with immediate warmth. "Jessica, I've missed you so much. Jordan and I were just talking about you last week, wondering how you were doing." Our coffee meeting turned into a 3-hour conversation that restored a crucial piece of my pre-Ryan identity. Diane remembered the ambitious, confident artist I had been before the incremental compromises of my marriage whittled away my sense of self. Her recollections helped me reconnect with qualities I had suppressed or forgotten. "You were always the brave one," she reminded me. "Remember when you organized that protest against the administration cutting the visual arts budget? You had the president of the university sitting in your studio for 2 hours, looking at student work until he reversed the decision." I had forgotten that version of myself. The woman who fought for principles, who believed in her own voice and vision. Glimpsing her again through Diane's memories was like recovering a precious heirloom I hadn't realized was missing. As my support network expanded, so did my practical resources. Diane's husband, Jordan, a financial advisor, offered to review my situation and help develop a post-divorce financial strategy. My mother introduced me to her neighbor, a real estate agent specializing in helping women transition after divorce. Claire's law firm colleagues provided referrals to forensic accountants who could trace and document Ryan's financial maneuvers. With each connection and resource I gathered, my position strengthened. The woman who had once defined herself primarily as Ryan's wife was gradually being replaced by someone more complex and complete. A professional illustrator, a daughter, a sister, a friend, an individual with her own support system and capabilities. 10. Days after discovering Ryan's betrayal, I sat at my drawing table for the first time in months, sketching preliminary concepts for the Moonlight Meadow series. My phone buzzed with a text from Amber. "Meeting with the DA's office went well. They're taking the wire fraud seriously." As I returned to my sketching, I realized something profound had shifted. The fear and uncertainty that had initially overwhelmed me had been replaced by a strange, unexpected sense of liberation. Without Ryan's subtle constraints, without the constant accommodation of his priorities and needs, my world was expanding rather than collapsing. The path ahead would not be easy. Legal battles rarely are, especially against someone as strategic and unscrupulous as Ryan had proven to be. But I was no longer facing those battles as an isolated individual, dependent on the very person who had betrayed me. I had assembled a network of support, legal, financial, professional, and emotional, that would sustain me through whatever challenges emerged. For the first time in years, I was building something entirely my own, a foundation for a future defined by my choices rather than by Ryan's manipulation. The unexpected camping trip that had revealed his betrayal had also, ironically, shown me my own strength. And that discovery was worth more than anything Ryan had taken from me. 6 weeks after discovering Ryan's fake camping trip, I stood in the doorway of my new apartment, surveying the space that represented my fresh start. It was smaller than the house Ryan and I had shared, just a one-bedroom with an alcove I'd converted into a studio, but it was filled with natural light, perfect for my illustration work, and most importantly, it was mine alone. The journey to this moment had been challenging but transformative. Ryan, true to form, had not accepted defeat gracefully. When he realized I wouldn't be manipulated into a quick, favorable settlement, he'd escalated his tactics. First came the financial pressure. Despite the court orders freezing our joint assets, Ryan had apparently prepared for this contingency. Investment accounts I hadn't known existed were suddenly emptied. Art pieces we'd collected disappeared from the house during hours I was meeting with attorneys. The property tax bill arrived showing delinquent payments for the past 2 quarters, despite Ryan's assurances he'd handled them. Classic scorched earth approach, Elaine had explained during our strategy session. If he can't control the assets, he'll try to devalue or encumber them before division. Rather than demoralizing me, Ryan's tactics only strengthened my resolve. Each underhanded maneuver provided additional evidence for the court of his financial misconduct, building a case that was becoming increasingly difficult for even his expensive attorney to defend. The professional attacks came next. Ryan had always maintained connections with Seattle's close-knit creative community through his firm's clients. Now he leveraged those relationships to spread subtle doubts about my reliability and stability. Whispers reached me through well-meaning friends. I was having a breakdown, becoming vindictive, making irrational accusations during an emotional crisis. He's trying to undermine your professional reputation before you can re-establish it, Claire observed. It's preemptive damage control. My response was not confrontation, but demonstration. I channeled my energy into the Moonlight Meadow illustrations, producing some of my finest work. When Marcus displayed the preliminary sketches at the Children's Book Showcase, the response was overwhelmingly positive. 2 additional publishers approached me about future projects, and a small gallery owner inquired about exhibiting my personal work. Success proved the most effective rebuttal to rumors. As my professional reputation strengthened, Ryan's whisper campaign faded into irrelevance. The emotional manipulation was perhaps the most difficult challenge. After his initial anger, Ryan shifted to nostalgic appeals, text messages referencing inside jokes from our early years together, emails containing photos from happier times, a delivery of lilies, my favorite, on our anniversary with a card reading simply 12 years, worth saving. These gestures, designed to trigger emotional confusion and vulnerability, might have worked months earlier. But with the support of weekly therapy sessions and my reconstructed support network, I recognized them for what they were. Not genuine attempts at reconciliation, but tactical maneuvers to weaken my resolve. I maintained the boundaries my therapist had helped establish. No direct communication except through attorneys, no response to emotional appeals, documentation of all contact attempts. Each manipulative gesture simply accumulated as evidence of Ryan's character for the divorce proceedings. The final test came 3 days before I was scheduled to move into my new apartment. I returned home from a meeting with my financial advisor to find Ryan's car in the driveway. My heart raced as I considered calling Claire or even the police. The restraining order explicitly prohibited him from entering our home when I was present. Instead, I took a deep breath, remembering my therapist's guidance about remaining centered in crisis. I called Claire from the car, ensuring someone knew my situation, then walked confidently to my own front door. Ryan sat at the kitchen island, a bottle of our favorite wine open between 2 glasses, his posture deliberately casual as if his presence We're perfectly normal. This is a violation of the restraining order, I said calmly, remaining near the door, phone visibly in hand. I'm giving you one opportunity to leave before I call the police. Always so dramatic, Jess, he replied with the affectionate exasperation he had often used to minimize my concerns. I still legally own half this house. I'm merely here to discuss the settlement offer my attorney sent yesterday. This adversarial approach is unnecessary between people who once meant everything to each other. The familiar script, reasonable, Ryan dealing with overreacting Jessica, was so transparent now that I almost pitied his predictability. Any settlement discussions happen through our attorneys, I reminded him. And the restraining order supersedes your property rights until the divorce is finalized. You have 30 seconds to leave. His expression hardened, the reasonable facade cracking. This isn't you, Jessica. This cold, calculating person? This isn't who you are. These lawyers and your sister have turned you against me, convinced you to destroy our life together over one mistake. 20 seconds, I replied, beginning to dial. Ryan stood abruptly, mask falling completely. You think you've won, don't you? That you and your little conspiracy with Amber have outsmarted me? This isn't over. I've built my career navigating financial complications far more complex than this divorce. When I'm finished, you'll be lucky to keep that pathetic apartment you're so proud of. His words were designed to terrify, to remind me of my vulnerability and his power. 2 months ago, they would have succeeded. Now they only confirmed the truth I had gradually accepted. The man I had loved, had built a life with, had never truly existed. He had been a carefully constructed persona, concealing someone who viewed relationships as transactions and people as assets to be manipulated. Time's up, I said, completing the call to the police. I suggest you leave before they arrive. A restraining order violation won't help your position with the licensing board investigation. The mention of the professional licensing investigation, initiated after evidence of client fund mismanagement emerged during our financial discovery, drained the remaining color from Ryan's face. Without another word, he brushed past me and left, his departure as calculated as his arrival had been. My hands trembled as I locked the door behind him, the confrontation leaving me shaken despite my outward composure. But beneath the physiological, stress response was something unexpected, a profound sense of closure. I had faced Ryan at his most manipulative and remained steadfast in my boundaries. Whatever power he had once held over me was gone. The legal proceedings continued for another 4 months, a complex process of financial discovery, asset division negotiations, and determination of professional practice values. Ryan fought every concession, dragging out proceedings that could have been resolved more quickly with reasonable cooperation. During those months, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. My illustrations for the Moonlight Meadow series received critical acclaim, opening doors to additional projects. I established a routine in my new apartment, gradually replacing objects associated with painful memories with items that reflected my emerging identity. I reconnected with neglected passions, taking a ceramics class I'd always been interested in, joining a hiking group that explored trails around Seattle, attending lectures and exhibitions that Ryan had always dismissed as pretentious. Most importantly, I rebuilt my internal landscape, reclaiming my decision-making authority, reconnecting with my intuition, and learning to trust my perceptions without seeking external validation. The woman who had become invisible within her own marriage gradually became visible to herself again. Amber and I maintained an unusual friendship bonded by shared experience. She had successfully recovered her investment in the condo through legal action and was now dating a physical therapist colleague who, by all accounts, treated her with genuine respect. I've started recognizing the red flags, she told me during one of our occasional coffee meetings. Things I dismissed with Ryan jump out immediately now. It's like having learned a new language. Once you know the vocabulary of manipulation, you hear it everywhere. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday morning. The settlement, while not the total victory Elaine had initially hoped for, represented a fair division of assets that acknowledged my contributions to the marriage and Ryan's financial misconduct. The judge's ruling included specific findings of fact regarding the forged documents and hidden accounts, creating a permanent record of the truth that Ryan couldn't spin or manipulate. As I left the courthouse, Claire at my side, rain gently misting my face, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Grief for the marriage I had believed in, relief at the formal conclusion of legal battles, apprehension about the fully independent life ahead. But predominant among these feelings was a quiet pride in my own resilience. "What now?" Claire asked as we reached her car. I smiled, realizing I welcomed the open-endedness of the question. "Now I keep building. The children's publisher wants to discuss a book that I would both write and illustrate. My lease is up in 3 months, and I'm considering looking for a place with a dedicated studio space. And I promised Mom I'd finally take that trip to Japan we've talked about for years." "Sounds like you have it all figured out," Claire observed. "Not even close," I laughed. "But I'm comfortable with that uncertainty now. It feels like possibility rather than instability." That evening, I sat in my apartment's bay window watching the rain pattern the glass, sketchbook open on my lap. I was working on a personal project, an illustrated children's book about a woman who discovers her house is actually a bird cage, and her journey learning to fly again after the door is unexpectedly opened. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A chill ran through me as I read the message. "Congratulations on the divorce. Hollow victory when you're sleeping alone. You'll realize what you've thrown away. R." 6 weeks ago, such a message would have shaken me, triggered doubt and vulnerability. Now, it simply confirmed how completely Ryan misunderstood what had occurred. He still believed this was a contentious divorce created by my unreasonable reaction to his mistake. He remained incapable of recognizing that what had actually transpired was my liberation from a relationship built on deception and control. I deleted the message without responding and returned to my sketching, adding more detail to the bird's outstretched wings as she navigates her first uncertain flight. The image reflected my own journey, the initial terror of unexpected freedom giving way to the exhilaration of self-directed movement. The woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal through a careless Facebook photo was not the same woman who now sat creating art that would touch others' lives. That discovery, painful as it had been, had initiated a transformation far more significant than the betrayal itself. I had lost a husband, yes, but I had found myself. And in that reclamation lay the true victory, one Ryan would never understand and could never diminish. As I added color to the bird's wings, I smiled at the irony. Ryan's fake camping trip, intended to facilitate his double life, had instead catalyzed my authentic one. Sometimes the greatest gifts arrive disguised as devastation. Sometimes the path to strength requires traveling through vulnerability. Sometimes it takes a profound betrayal to reveal a more profound truth, that the capacity for renewal exists within us, waiting for the moment when necessity awakens possibility. My journey wasn't ending with the divorce. It was just beginning. And for the first time in years, I was the author of my own story, writing each page with hard-earned wisdom and reclaimed agency. The next chapter remained unwritten, but the pen was firmly in my hand.